So we are just approaching the start time for the webinar. I can see we've still got lots of people kind of flowing in through the waiting room. So we'll just give it another minute before we actually start.
Hey, Andrew, are the slides going to be made available after the presentation today?
Good question. Yeah.
He just went on mute.
Okay, not quite sure what happened there. Sorry, to answer your question, the whole session is going to be recorded and will be available, and we'll share that link. But also the few slides that we do show, yes, will also be made available. Most of today is going to be a discussion. So for those of you just joining, we've still got quite a few people just flowing in. So I'll just hang on a few more moments before we start. If I could ask those of you that have joined to please go on to mute for now, and just for the sake of the bandwidth, to have your camera off, and then we can make sure we get everybody in that needs to be in. Okay, well, I make it about 3 minutes past the hour, so I think we'll get started. So first of all, welcome to this webinar hosted by the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport North America, which we'll abbreviate to CILT during today's webinar. A special welcome to those joining from the Emerald Isle. Happy St. Patrick's Day to you today. My name is Andrew Young. I'm Vice Chair of CILT North America, and I'm also Chair of our Rail Forum group. For those of you not aware of CILT, we're a professional body for everyone who works in the logistics and transportation industry. And that encompasses freight, passenger, transportation planning, and supply chains. We have 34,000 members around the world. We're in about 35 countries. And really our mission is to develop the art and science of logistics and transport. And we do that through research, education, networking, and also the sharing of ideas. So we run multiple events and forums such as this webinar. We also support the career development of our members, and we offer industry training relevant to the different parts of logistics and transport. And we award certificates, which are CILT accredited certificates recognized throughout the world. So that's really who CILT are, for those of you that don't know. Today's webinar is a really fascinating subject. It's going to shine the light on an innovative approach to state rail planning in the US and how that's been adopted by economic development stakeholders in the state of Nevada. I'm joined today by a panel that is made up of 2 rail freight experts from the US and from the UK, but also joined by two economic development representatives from Nevada. And together we're going to be debating how rail freight can be an enabler for economic development, in fact, sustainable growth and economic development in Nevada and also beyond. So I'm delighted to introduce who we have speaking to you today. Their pictures should be coming up on screen now. First of all, joining from Pennsylvania is Michael Sussman. Michael is Chairman and CEO of Strategic Rail Finance. For the past 25 years, he's coordinated the financing of hundreds of rail-related projects across the US and Canada. And he leads a team of experienced staff and advisors on diverse projects developing the capacity and sustainability of North American railroads. His company was selected by Nevada's Department of Transport to develop their 2021 rail plan. And that's what we'll be discussing in detail today. Michael is also the founder and chairman of OnTrackNorthAmerica, a non-profit organization which advocates progressive freight transportation and land use policy to grow the rail industry in North America. Second along is Julian Worth, who's joining us from the United Kingdom. Julian is a CILT colleague of mine. He's the chair of the Rail Freight Forum in the UK. And as an industry executive, he has 40 years experience in rail freight, including as managing director of Transrail Freight and marketing director of English, Welsh and Scottish Railways. These were two of the largest freight operators in the country. And Julian now provides strategic advice on rail-based logistics to governments, manufacturers and retailers around the world. And he's also famous for developing a demystifying rail freight training course, both for CILT and for the rail freight industry body, Rail Freight Group in the UK. Julian, I think it's fair to say, is a strong advocate of developing rail freight as an enabler for sustainable development and economic growth. And he's been involved in a lot of the positive transformation of the industry in the UK. I'm also delighted to have Kris Sanchez on the panel today. So Kris is from the Silver State of Nevada. He is the Deputy Director for the Nevada Governor's Office of Economic Development, abbreviated to GOED. GOED's role is to develop a vibrant and innovative and sustainable economy for Nevada, bringing high quality and high paying jobs to the state. Kris, as Deputy Director, is responsible for facilitating economic development opportunities with new and existing businesses.
So here's the deal. I'm going to send you.
Oh, sorry. I think somebody needs to go on mute, please. Just going back on to Kris. So he develops the strategies to grow and diversify Nevada's economic base. He also manages 5 GOED divisions, including business development and international. And then on the far right of your screen is Sheldon, also joining us from Nevada. Sheldon Mudd is the Executive Director for the Northeastern Nevada Regional Development Authority, NNRDA. The NNRDA is the largest geographic development authority in Nevada. It covers 40,000 square miles and is responsible for 1/3 of the state's economic development pursuits. Sheldon oversees the economic development activity of 4 Nevada counties, and his team work to enhance the local infrastructure, housing, and workforce development in an effort to support their primary objective, business development and recruitment in their region. And both Kris and Sheldon were involved in the Nevada 2021 State Rail Plan and its correlation of rail freight planning to economic development objectives in the state of Nevada. So, like I say, a fascinating topic, and I'm delighted to have such high profile speakers that will be talking with us today. Before we start, just a few housekeeping items. needless to say, if you get cut off, if you drop off, please just rejoin on the same link that you used to come through. Hopefully you'll join us again. If I can ask everybody to stay on mute with the camera switched off throughout the presentation today. Having said that, we really do encourage your questions. We want to make this as engaging as possible. We have a good lineup of panelists, and we have made sure we got plenty of time in the format of today's session to really kind of have this as a panel discussion and to take your questions. I'm sure everybody by now is aware of a chat feature which exists on Zoom. So please utilize that and send us your questions. We'll consolidate those and ask them. And then finally, today's session is scheduled for 90 minutes. It is going to be recorded, and everybody who's registered will receive a link to actually then see the recording, which will be on CILT's YouTube channel. We'll also share any slides or material that we also cover today. So without further ado, let's press on with the webinar. First of all, I'm going to hand over to Michael Sussman, and he's going to share some context around the approach taken with the 2021 rail plan for Nevada, and how this whole system, transportation and economic development plan for the state has attracted so much attention since it was published earlier this year. That's probably going to take us about 15-20 minutes. After that, we'll come and have the panel all together, and we'll be taking your questions and discussing other things that come up during today. So Michael, I'll hand over to you, and hopefully you can take control of the screen.
Well, let's see, we need my image. Andrew? Well, I want to begin by saying hello to each and every one of you, whether you're off screen or off camera. I appreciate you for being here, and I appreciate the role that you can have in helping us scale up what we've accomplished and laid down in Nevada. Many of you might not know that the United States Department of Transportation has a requirement for each state to submit a state rail plan about every 5 years. And this has been going on for the last 13 years. The phone rang in our office about 2 years ago, it was the Nevada Department of Transportation. Having read about our comments and observations about other states' rail plans, they were curious as to whether we could bring the thoughts that we've developed to the state. I should say that the Nevada State Rail Plan really is imbued with now 26 years of the work that I have done and my firm has done and the folks in my company have done, where we've been all around the United States and Canada supporting project sponsors in getting projects up, running, funded, and contributing to their community. Along the way, I got to see that we have a funny relationship with railroads. You know, when you think about it, moving heavy weight and people over land on wheels, as age-old an invention as that is, it's still here with no technological replacement on the horizon. Yet in the United States, we have a freight transportation system where the trucking industry is an $850 billion a year industry, and the railroad industry is about an $85 billion a year industry. 26 years ago, when I learned that, I thought, wow, this is really something that needs to be addressed. And I know many of you share that concern and that commitment. And the opportunity in Nevada was vast in that we were given the opening to bring all our observations about rail design and rail planning to an entire state. Andrew, are we, my screen is a little crazy, so I just want to check in, see if I'm coming across. It doesn't look like I'm.
We can hear and see you, Mike, but we're seeing somebody else's desktop, unless that's your desktop.
Yeah, it looks like it's John Hedrick's screen, interestingly.
Yes, John, I think you somehow managed to share your screen there. That's it. Try again, Michael.
Okay. I'm still getting, let me try one more time. Very good.
Yeah, with it, you've got it. We can see
All
it.
right. For those of you who don't know, this is Nevada. And I'll just point out that this is Interstate I-15 on its way to the San Pedro Bay in Southern California. And here's I-80 through Reno on its way to San Francisco Bay and Northern California. And there's four principles I think I want to focus on that the Nevada State Rail Plan is built on. Truth, then collaboration, inclusion, and commitment to results. Let me repeat that. Truth, collaboration, inclusion, and commitment to results. It takes a lot of positivity to create a new future. And moving forward has to be based on what's the current dynamics that we're out to improve. When you read most transportation plans, and particularly rail plans, they talk about how wonderful rail is and how much of a contribution it is to the state. But let's take, let me share some realities about what's happening in Nevada as we speak. Nevada is adjacent to the 5th largest economy in the world, California. Not only the 5th largest economy in the world, but ports that allow and should allow businesses to access the rest of the world. But in fact, because its proximity to California has rendered it very attractive to be served by trucking, which appreciates short, repetitive moves, it's that much not attractive to the rail industry. Particularly the Class 1 part of the industry. Class 1s in North America are the 7 largest networks of railroads. And they have evolved their business model to focus on large volumes of long trains and many cars and going long distances. The result in Nevada is that 70% of all the trucks moving in the state are coming from or going to California. That's a particular problem because, as you can see, with Las Vegas and Reno sitting right on close to the state line, all the development that's happening is occurring east of Las Vegas and east of Reno, thereby continually increasing the number of trucks that are moving through I-15 and I-80 to and from California, exacerbating traffic problems in both states. Now, when I say truth is one of the key elements, let me use that to shine a light on the relationship between trucking and railroads. And we should get this out on the table and make it safe for all of us to talk rationally and reasonably about the relationship between trucks and railroads. Do we really want to continue to pit two modes against each other? Do we want to have railroads and trucks operating in an optimal efficiency, optimal integration? And clearly, the degree to which we have a system that uses both modes efficiently is going to be the path to having a transportation system that's also sustainable. And the underutilization of railroads, as we point out in each of the opening statements of each chapter and executive summary in the rail plan, point out that our underutilization of railroads is a societal dynamic. There's nothing productive about blaming the railroad industry or the class ones for the fact that as a society, and this is somewhat universal around the world, we've made a decision to invest in roads that are utilized not only for passenger individual vehicles, but for freight vehicles, trucks. We've made the business of trucking much more viable. We're out, and the Nevada State Rail Plan demonstrates this, to remind all of us that we have a choice when it comes to how we invest in freight transportation. You'll notice that I do speak a lot about freight transportation. And in the Nevada State Rail Plan, we focused a lot on freight. We did a lot of innovative thinking about passenger as well, and we've received a lot of appreciation for that. We were invited to focus on freight, and there are a number of reasons for that in the state. The industrial development opportunities are significant. So applying truth to another extremely important value is collaboration. When I say collaboration, I want to quickly include some reflecting on competition. This is a particularly American value, and it's very active around the world. I would say that we're at a place where we're all wondering what the appropriate role of competition is and how do we transition to a collaborative relationship amongst us where we can sit down and think together. Think about a county that wants to develop a rail-served industrial park. Is it more effective for that county to rush to get that industrial park built, or is the path to efficiency going to come from sitting down with the other counties on a corridor and determining together, with all perspectives included, how is it that we're going to, where is it that we want to build each portion of the freight infrastructure to connect all the towns in a corridor in the most efficient manner possible. Now, in Nevada, what we did to make that kind of collaboration feasible was develop a sectional team approach where we brought 8 regions of stakeholders, distinguished who they were, and had them gather in planning sessions along the way. Each of these regions, we were able to develop a particular rail development strategy. So in the Fernley Region 5 area, for example, there's tremendous amount of industrial land development. And what's needed there is for the land developers to have the benefit of being informed by industry expertise so that they could proceed with their plans in an intelligent manner and include rail in their development plans. when we look at inclusion as demonstrated by the maps, the unique maps that we created of the Nevada rail system, you can see that we identified all industrial properties alongside the state's rail system. We determined what business was in each building. These dots relate to spreadsheet and data system that has the ownership of each building. What's relevant in this shot is that the only building that's using rail is this black, the building with the black dot. Now, this is in an area that's been developed. And of course, that requires one type of strategy to reconnect these businesses and the uses in those buildings to rail. Bear with me a moment. All right. In Nevada, here is, this is the Tahoe Reno Industrial Center, one of the top 3 largest industrial parks in the world. You'll see the few businesses that are using rail. You'll see over here, this large building is the Tesla Gigafactory. Shining a truth on what's going on has us have to mention that from this entire 100,000-acre industrial park, there is less than 3% of the freight that's moving by rail. The Tesla business is responsible for 75 tractor trailers a day coming in and out of that facility. 55 of them an evening are going to its factory in Fremont, California, where there is rail service. Here, the rail line currently ends 2 miles from the Tesla Gigafactory. And this is a demonstration. This is a demonstration of what's happening around the country, where we are increasingly moving to a truck-centric economy. When we went to Nevada, we began expressing that this was going to be a plan where the public sector and the private sector completely got on the same page. So we've reached out to almost every commodity group and the largest and smallest businesses in the state in order to uncover their intelligence, their knowledge, their wisdom about what they need to forward their business opportunities, what they know about rail and freight and supply chains, and therefore informing and infusing this rail plan with the in-depth knowledge of the folks that you'd want to have the investments and plans for new rail services and infrastructure actually support. So, Andrew, I think I'm going to wind up there and invite you to start helping with the dialogue.
Okay. Yep. Thank you. Thank you, Michael. I'll put my camera back on. I don't know whether it's worth keeping that slide up, actually, because I was going to invite Kris, Julian, and Sheldon to also come back on, at least with their camera. I thought maybe to start off with, if we could get a perspective, initially from the guys in Nevada, in terms of what this study that you did means for them, and then very interested to kind of get a view from Julian as well, where we've got a country like the UK, which has had a lot of focus on economic regeneration as well as development. with the use of rail freight. So Kris, if you are there, would you like to kind of make a first comment or response on the points here?
Sure. Can you hear me, Andrew?
I can.
Thank you, and I appreciate the invitation to participate today, and thanks, Michael, for the overview on the plan. You know, there's a few points I think are relevant to make with respect to economic development in Nevada, especially coming out of COVID. You know, we being GOED, went through the last year putting together a state plan for economic development. And as part of that process, we realized that we needed to get smart on infrastructure very, very quickly. Much of that has to do with pre-COVID experience, where, as Michael's highlighting, we had not had a statewide strategy for how we invest in and advance infrastructure priorities and projects. In fact, we had an incremental approach to infrastructure and a project-focused approach to infrastructure. We realized through our planning processes and in conjunction with Michael and his team that we needed to be thinking about ecosystems. We needed to be thinking about networks. We needed to be thinking about Nevada's place in the Southwest region. And more importantly, how we add additional value to industry and how we solve problems. So, you know, we are next to the 5th largest economy in the world. That's a tremendous advantage. And one of the things that we needed to start thinking about in Nevada was how do we leverage that, but how do we add value? So with the Port of LA, the Port of Oakland, for instance, what are those pressure points? How do we come together? How do we think about our role in let's say, the broader context of logistics and the movement of freight in the region? And the other thing too that we realized is that, you know, and all of us have experienced this, but we've seen tremendous advances in the utilization of technology over the last year, in many cases accelerating adoption by shortening it from a 10-year window down to a matter of months, if not a year. That has ramifications on how industry functions. It has ramifications on where industry is going. And so we find ourselves in a continual state of response and planning as we come out of COVID. We are the hardest hit state, and Las Vegas is the hardest hit region in the United States. We have a very cyclical economy. Unfortunately, we have not diversified in the way that we need to over the years. And so we view infrastructure development and infrastructure strategy as a way to help us achieve those goals, and that is diversification. The last point that I think is important is that you know, our industrial development in the state is predicated, and the future of that is predicated on our ability to strategically invest in infrastructure. So we are a state that is one of the top mining states in the U.S., one of the top copper producers in the world, and as well as gold and silver and a whole host of other metals. And the industry is looking to grow quite robustly, as we are see an interest by private industry to be in Nevada. But as a state, we've got to be investing in infrastructure, and we've got to be able to work with our federal partners, work with our sister states in doing so, so that we can realize our full potential. Because if we don't, we are going to be hitting a ceiling in terms of our ability to grow. So happy to join the panel today. I'm happy to be able to provide some of the economic development perspective as it pertains to the rail plan, and looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Kris. I think maybe before we kind of go to Sheldon, let's actually get a bounce back to the rail side and speak to Julian, just in terms of kind of your insights on this. This is very much from an outside in perspective, and then we'll look at what this actually meant for the NNRDA, and then we'll start to take some of the questions that I can see coming through. So Julian, a few words on your perspective.
Thank you, Andrew. Good evening, everyone from the UK. Very happy to be with you this evening, or good morning, I think, where you are. I pretend to know very little about US railroading. I have traveled by train from Denver through Salt Lake City to Oakland, so I'm not completely unfamiliar with Nevada. But it's quite interesting that there are some similarities and some differences between the two countries. I actually think there are more similarities than there are differences. But just to give you some context, our average haul in the UK is only about 100 miles. You know, we're a small country. We have a small number of hauls of maybe 200-300 miles, and very few at about 400. So we are very much a shorter distance operation in the UK. Structurally, we are moving decisively away from being a bulk freight carrier, where our coal business, which used to account for about 40% of all road freight in the UK, has dropped now to virtually nothing. We see these days about maybe 5 or 6 coal trains a day in the whole of the UK. So coal's gone. And a lot of the other bulk commodities like steel and oil are in decline as well. We have one very bright spot in bulk, and that's with building materials, aggregates and cement and related materials, where are growing very, very rapidly indeed. Where, of course, we have strong modal strengths in moving bulk materials. But the big opportunity, this is where the similarity is very strong to what Michael was saying, is in consumer goods and retail. And we've now moved to the point in the UK where over 40%, in fact, getting on nearly half of everything we move is consumer goods. So we've moved very, very strongly and very quickly, actually, away from being a bulk carrier to being a consumer goods carrier. We have advantages in terms of good connections to ports, but we are really very poor in connections to inland distribution depots and manufacturing plants. So again, you see strong similarities with what Michael was talking about in Nevada. The way we're tackling those issues is that we have a very strong intermodal approach. So let me make a distinction for you between multimodal as an approach to getting freight on rail, and then intermodal as the specific equipment that we use, containers and swap bodies and such like. Because pretty much everything we do is part of a multimodal supply chain. So we have to fit rail into those multimodal supply chains. We can't expect customers to redesign those supply chains. We have to fit what we can offer into those supply chains. And we're doing with increasing success, I think it's fair to say. The non-coal carriers in the UK are I think probably a record for at least the last 50 years. So we seem to be doing something right. In terms of the changes recently, we are competing over ever shorter distances. So we are now, we see daily intermodal trains in the UK less than 100 miles. So maybe about 80, 90 miles. And we're going ever shorter. We're currently working on one which would be about 50 miles. Now, you might say, how on earth can you make that pay? It's about asset utilization. So the 100-mile trips are typically with 2 round trips every day with a locomotive and a set of wagons. And the 50-mile round trips would be 3 round trips every day with a locomotive and a set of wagons. So we run the things hard, we discharge them quickly, we reload them, and we get them back for the next trip. And by doing that, you get the unit costs down to a level which can compete with the trucks for the trunk haul. But I would stress, much as Michael was saying, this is a collaborative endeavor. It's rail on the trunk haul, marrying up with trucks for the local and the regional distribution. And that's ever more the case as we move towards a decarbonized economy. The UK has a legal obligation to decarbonize by 2050. And the emerging model is to trunk by electric rail and distribute by battery truck. We're not there yet, but I think we're moving very encouragingly to that end. All sorts of policy considerations, which we can talk about if you like. But I think, Andrew, that probably gives people a picture of where we are in the UK.
Yep. Thank you, Julian. And for anybody that wondered why I'd got somebody from the UK on, it wasn't just because I'm a countryman of Julian. I thought it would be interesting for everyone to hear some of that progress. So Sheldon, I think I'm actually going to change our script a little bit that we talked about, because we've had a question through which you might want to address as part of what you were going to say. So Henry from Transport Canada has asked, what are some of the policy outcomes of the plan, and specifically incentives for local government authorities to concentrate industrial development around rail lines. So I think for you, Sheldon, kind of, I guess, have you seen rail as being an opportunity area? Have you lost pursuits maybe because there's not been that rail availability? And what now do you see as new opportunities for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So just so folks are aware out there, so we represent just one small corner of Nevada, but we do fall under the state umbrella of Mr. Sanchez's group. But with that said, oftentimes we kind of represent all of rural Nevada out here. And so we really make up about 99% of the land mass and only about 1% of the population. So Real quick, I just want to express my thank you to Mr. Sussman and his group for including us in the conversation. He mentioned collaboration and inclusion, and oftentimes, because we are the little guys, we don't always make it to the table, and we had a major role in this plan. But to try to answer that question, Andrew, a little bit. So one of the great things about our small communities out here in rural Nevada is they're very business oriented. And so as we've talked about rail more in the last year, and specifically like Mr. Sanchez's state rail plan that he mentioned, we did a regional economic development strategy in 2019 to 2020, where rail had a portion or was certainly brought up within that conversation. And so a lot of our smaller communities realize the importance that rail would have here in rural Nevada. And so one of the things that we have noticed to answer the question about whether or not we've lost companies as a result is we've kept track, and I've been in this role about 3 years. And in that time, sorry about that, in that time, we have noticed that about a third of the companies that express interest in our area require rail or rail access. They want direct access to that rail. So we immediately noticed that we were losing out on the potential of 33 to 35% of potential business development here in the area because we just simply did not have that access. And that's one of those things that was identified in the rail plan, is the fact that even though we have this great mainline rail system going through the entirety of the northern part of our state, the access points are limited. And so what some of the local communities are trying to do right now is actually change that. So we have a couple of communities who are going through some developmental concepts right now and trying to set up municipal rail parks with, eventually with full utilities and so forth, so that they can capture those businesses that are looking for a place to land. And so we're still really early in the process. The rail plan just came out, but we actually started that process in some of those communities before the rail plan was even released, because these folks realized the importance of getting these facilities in place. And so that's one of the beauties about small town government. It is so small, and in some of our areas, it's a single layer of government. They can really bounce through the process a lot quicker. So I hope that answers that question. That from a local perspective, locally, people are already acting on the findings that have been realized in this plan.
Okay, that's great to hear, Sheldon. Yeah, thank you for that. So let's just say we're getting quite a lot of questions through. I'm trying to kind of group these into areas so we can cover more than one at a time. So I think I'm going to start with a theme that we've really been having, which I think is a good starting point around context. And I think, Michael, probably best if you take this. One simply is if you could maybe just give a description of what the rail system currently is in Nevada. I think, not everybody's going to be aware of that. And then linked to that, you mentioned about the collaboration with the operators. Who are the class ones that operate there, and who is it that was involved? I mean, was there contact with them, and what were the individuals? That would cover 2 or 3 of the points that have been requested.
Oh, that's great. Nevada is distinct from almost every other state in the union in that it has no short line railroads. And short line railroads are the branch lines and terminal railroads, of which there's about 600 in the United States. There are 7 large corporate-owned, multi-billion-dollar Class 1 railroads. Nevada has 2 that operate, and all the rail in the state is owned by Union Pacific Railroad, except for 2 or 3 tourist rail lines that exist in the state. So this is primarily mainline track. So what we did was zeroed in on sidings, what are called team tracks, which are tracks alongside the main line that were used at one point for local rail access. And I'm going to do a real quick, if I can take the screen back, Andrew. I'm just going to show a something unique that we did, which was to identify. I'll just give you a quick glance here. This is a 550 line inventory that we made of every single rail siding in the state and who's using it and whether it's being used or not. There are a couple of important points to make here, Andrew and everyone, and that's that there are 188 warehouses that are adjacent to these rail lines. And I should say that the class ones do have some branch lines off of their main lines, primarily in the Las Vegas area, in the Reno area. And this is where you see a surge of warehouse development. Of 188 warehouses, only part of one uses rail. So in order to do something, to give the state the tools so that this plan can be implemented, one of the things that we've done was gathered this inventory of buildings, sidings, tracks, so that then when we're gathering the stakeholders in each region, we can give them access to what they need to know to reconnect rail and make it more available for local businesses. And then you asked who was involved in this rail plan. It's all stakeholder groups. We practice radical inclusion. We talked about this at the beginning of Chapter 4, the Freight Rail Strategic Plan. The question that we went into the state to ask and answer was, can you gather an entire state's stakeholders, interested parties? One, can you identify them, catalog them, organize them, and operate effectively if you're reaching out and gathering everyone's perspective? And indeed, we found you can. And we found that it's not more complicated to include everyone. It's actually more elegantly efficient. When you bring plans forward, in this case, a rail plan, and you've identified all the potential businesses and towns and counties that the growth of rail can support, now you have the best chance of bringing forward investments in that system that are increasingly stable and bolstered by the fact that you have diversity of projects. You're not just building a system to support only the largest businesses or the largest projects. So I'll wrap up those remarks there, Andrew.
Yes, thank you, Mike. I think also there was a specific about, the engagement of the class ones. I think it's fair to say that often everybody just puts this on their shoulders, and I think, as you pointed out, this isn't about pointing blame at anybody. They are a key stakeholder in this, but they're not the solution by themselves. So what was their involvement with their industrial development teams?
Yeah, we reached out to them even before I first came to Nevada. Both railroads expressed their interest and their continued partnership by showing up at every one of the community gatherings that we convened. In the words of the head of industrial development for Union Pacific Railroad, let's intend to do this so well in Nevada that other states are clamoring for it.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so we've got a few questions which I'll put towards Kris, and feel free to call on Michael or Sheldon if needed, but it's really about, how the status quo came to be in Nevada. Michael talked about the absence of rail being used. Is that a conscious decision by those firms that are setting up there, or does this really just come down to an ignorance or other barriers? And I think the other question was, what are the sectors of industry that we're seeing that either are interested in rail or are reticent, or that you're actually trying to attract? If you can kind of provide some color around those points, Kris.
Sure. So I think in the first question, the examples that you raised, it's kind of all the above. I think it's, from the planning perspective, rail, I think was kind of placed on the back burner. Michael in his initial remarks mentioned that this is kind of endemic of what's happened across the U.S. The development of the asset wasn't prioritized. And the mix of our industry is important to note as well. I mean, in the southern part of the state, the largest driver of our economy in Nevada is gaming and hospitality, gaming in the sense of gambling. As many people know, Las Vegas, all over the world, and I suspect the majority of the folks on the phone or on the Zoom here have been to Las Vegas, for contributing to our economy. But the point is that primary industry, much of what developed here in the southern part of the state, and to the extent I'd say the decades before the last two, we're focused on hospitality and gaming. And so, the infrastructure to support that industry is what the state focused on. As we move forward, there's definitely a desire, I mentioned diversification, to attract more industrial growth, more manufacturing to the state. And in order to do so, we've got to make sure that we can move freight more efficiently throughout the state and in the region. There has been several questions that have come up with respect to financing, and one of them kind of asked a question with respect to private sector, state dollars, and federal. Again, that answer is kind of all the above. We have to make sure that we have our house in order, so to speak. And what's been very helpful, the work that Strategic Rail Finance has done, is that we have to make our case, just like any other investment opportunity. We're competing across the country, across the region. And we've got to put our best foot forward. We've got to know our value proposition. We've got to know what we're going after, and we have to know how it's going to fit into the broader planning for the state. So, we have a state infrastructure bank legislation going through our legislature right now that the governor has introduced. We have a legislature that meets every 2 years. We hope to have that funded. The governor made a request of $75 million to seed fund that state infrastructure bank. The idea is that it's another tool for us to use to bring in private sector dollars, to bring in federal dollars, as well as state dollars to fund infrastructure projects. And so we see a lot of potential in terms of our ability to meet the demands of industry, and certainly the demands of the types of industry that we're trying to attract to the state to help us achieve our economic development goals. So hopefully that answers the questions that have been posed thus far.
Yes, thank you, Kris. Michael, did you want to add something in there?
Sure. The Nevada State Rail Plan is a business investment strategy. It's an economic development strategy that's grounded in a transformational understanding that there is ample private sector capital available for rail infrastructure projects. So often when public sector is creating transportation plans, there's a fear, because public sector generally is stewarding limited public sector dollars. But in the case of freight rail development and passenger rail as well, one, there are trillions of dollars available in the hands of private sector pension funds and infrastructure investment groups. What's missing has been coherent rail development, particularly supply chain-based strategies. So in Nevada, it's why we focused on who are the businesses that can experience growth and logistics-oriented efficiencies from new rail infrastructure and services, because those efficiencies become the underpinnings of the case for private sector investment. I saw someone ask a question about how do we rank projects, and it's a great question. We actually consciously did not rank projects. we gathered up every single project that we could identify in the state. What so often happens with ranking, which is generally a construct and a process that's brought about because the thinking is that there's not enough capital. But when you know that there is enough capital, then there's no need to rank, because what typically happens in ranking is only the largest projects or the ones in the most populated areas get funded, and the ones that are lower rank never get funded. And in Nevada, we took a 17 county, every town approach where it all matters. I think that's, that's what we need throughout the world, is the attention to the whole system. And it was extremely well received, and we're anticipating that the capital is now going to be able to flow into these projects, because we're not basing them just on serving one business at a time. By identifying all the possible users of a new infrastructure, we've gathered corridor strategies and regional strategies, not individual project approaches.
Okay, yes, thank you. And Sheldon, I from your perspective, obviously you're getting more into a region, but clearly you're sat on well, one of the largest kind of development regions in the world, not just in the country. You've probably got no shortage in terms of the development opportunities, but where do you see this changing your prioritization or your way of approaching that development?
Yeah, absolutely. So our region is absolutely blessed. As Mr. Sanchez mentioned earlier, we have no shortage of natural resources. We're a world leader in gold production, silver, copper, lithium now in northern Nevada. Vanadium's becoming a big commodity. There's a large deposit of vanadium that has recently been discovered. We have emerging industries like the industrial hemp industry. And so these are all things that, fortunately we have to work with. And so as Mr. Sussman had mentioned, focusing in on the supply chains associated with those things, and obviously just the ability to move raw resources and products into and out of the region are paramount to what we're doing. And so the opportunity that we have is just absolutely tremendous. Too many times, many of these resources that we have just simply leave the state, and oftentimes they leave the state by truck and go somewhere else for further manufacturing and processing. But I believe it was the lithium mine, the principles of the lithium mine that is preparing to go into Humboldt County. It indicated that one lithium molecule has to circumvent the globe twice before it can be put into a useful form. And so we would really like to see that process stop. I mean, we don't want to see so much travel with these products across the globe where they could easily be manufactured and processed right here in our area. So as Mr. Sussman had mentioned, the regional approach. So besides just, I mean, that's one element of the rail plan that we really appreciated, because they identified the fact that the Reno area trades primarily with the San Francisco Bay Area, Las Vegas with Los Angeles. But for us in Northeastern Nevada, it's either the Salt Lake City, Utah, Wasatch Valley there, or it might be the Magic Valley in southern Idaho, or even into the Treasure Valley of Idaho. And this becomes a huge factor, because by utilizing the synergies that exist across those borders, it'll certainly enhance our capability of what we can do here in regards to development and so forth. But when it comes to the rail itself, I mean, it just adds another element that can be utilized in order to move, goods and services. And as mentioned, we are a land of natural resources here that seem to be in great demand at the moment on a global scale. And so we certainly want to take advantage of that fact and get those things out to the world.
Okay, yeah, and very interesting. You talked about that, the kind of an industrial policy in a way, being able to move up the value chain, not just being an extractive center, but being able to kind of have more of the life cycle of those products, and that requires a logistic strategy. And I think the other point, just to follow on from that, Sheldon, is we spoke about the importance of, it's not just collaborating with operators and shippers, but it's the fact that you've got development agencies, regional authorities, and states that also have kind of been siloed in the past. And you mentioned all the markets that you're neighboring with. Do you see that as an area that you'll be changing a strategy?
I don't know if we'll change the strategy too much as just simply trying to gain more insights as to what's being produced and how we can add value to that production, or perhaps create a product here that could benefit those areas. It's just a matter of collecting information from those various regions and determining what is needed. By and large, what we're seeing out in rural Nevada is the fact that so many of these larger industrial areas, let's take Salt Lake City, for example, or we could use Reno, actually. Reno, Nevada is an example either way, but they've grown to such a degree that there are several businesses in those areas that are looking maybe to spread out. And so, we're catching a lot of interest from the Wasatch Valley in Utah, because there's simply no room left in the valley for them, or prices have gotten to a point where it's just not feasible for business. So they start, for those folks, they start looking west to see what the opportunities are. And obviously that's what we're seeing so much out of California as well, is, Nevada's business structure is just more conducive to business. And so then, of course, getting out here in these regions just becomes more and more affordable as a result. But so I wouldn't say we're necessarily changing the strategy. We're certainly utilizing what's been identified in that rail plan to try to capitalize on those things. And somebody I noticed in the comments had asked about how many of these companies that I had mentioned earlier, out of the third that were looking for rail, how many of them were actually, what industries were they from? And primarily they're all from manufacturing. And I would say about a quarter to a half of those, when it comes to manufacturing, had a direct contact to our mining industry. They were either wanting to utilize the raw resource, or they wanted to create or produce something that could be used by the mining industry. So I wanted to address that real quick as well. Essentially, we're just trying to build these clusters based off of what we know we have here, and we've just never had that in rural Nevada in the past. These vibrant clusters to support industry and so forth, and we're certainly trying to do that and utilize this rail plan to make a case for it.
Okay, absolutely. So as you were speaking then, I was thinking back to the UK and Julian, I know there has been actually more of a economic regional approach, in terms of how that could be developed, and rail became part of that. I don't know if there's any lessons that we could pick up.
I think the key point here is that it's a very multifaceted picture. You just can't rely on the railroads to do all the development work. In the UK, they're operating on margins of about 2 or 3%. So they simply don't have the economic firepower or the margins to do all that development work themselves. So everyone has to come to the party. We certainly have some public bodies, both national, regional, and some of the local guys who are very prepared to come and see what they can do. In some parts of the UK, for example, in Scotland, we have a direct grant system where the government will pay part of the cost of installing a new siding or a new facility. That's very helpful. That's not the case right across the UK, unfortunately. But the whole planning regime is fundamental to this, because certainly in a crowded country like the UK, the relationship between land use planning and transport is fundamental. You know, there are only so many places that you can put rail facilities, and to get that land use planning thing right is really important. We have something in the UK which you might like to think about perhaps as a concept, and that's a strategic rail freight interchange, where concentrations of warehousing, very much like you're seeing in Sheldon's area, now are strongly encouraged, indeed required actually by the planning system, to put a rail connection in to that complex. Not to all the warehouses, because we're intermodal orientated, it tends to be one intermodal facility on site, which all the warehouses can access on internal roads. So without going on the public highway, they can use just drag tractors to take the loads from the warehouse to the railhead and back. That gives you critical mass. And critical mass is really important. Even in the UK, where we have small trains, much smaller than you guys operate in the States, it's still vital to have critical mass. So geographical massing is very important. The other massing that is important is to work with people who can bring that volume together for you. And working with some enlightened road hauliers and enlightened truckers can be a really good way to do this. There's at least one person on the call from the UK here this evening who does just that and operates 2 or 3 trains every night between England and Scotland, where he's got anything up to about 20 or 30 customers on a train, and he is bringing that together. He's buying a wholesale service from the railroad in terms of locomotive wagons, drivers, etc., and he is then effectively retailing that onto a whole range of users, be they 3PLs or manufacturers or retailers or whatever. This is all about volume. To get the unit cost right, to make rail competitive on the trunk haul, you need volume, and both the physical aggregation and, if you like, the commercial aggregation are vital to enable that to happen.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And that was a great dovetail, Julian, into an area we've had a lot of questions about. And, you know, it's kind of really coming back to the fact that there are a lot of stakeholders involved here, but there's maybe one that is probably more important than any other, and that really is the rail operator. You know, for them, this is their business. It's not part of their overall strategy. It actually is their business. And I think I can kind of feel a degree of maybe skepticism that there's going to be why they would be on board with this, the extent that it works with the rest of their operating kind of system, particularly with things like PSR rolling in through North America. So I'm not sure, Michael, maybe you kind of might want to address that point. I'm sure that's not the first time you've been asked this.
Sure. You know, Union Pacific just released a information piece yesterday expressing their new commitment to diversity, creativity, and flexibility, and outstanding service. I haven't seen a declaration like that in 25 years. In Northwest Nevada, there's a rail line that goes to Hawthorne Army Depot that is only open for military service, infrequent service. There's an interchange needed to reinstitute commercial service. There's, by the way, 250 miles of track in this military installation. And since we started interacting with Union Pacific about this, they've come all the way around to forwarding a very creative, economical approach to building this interchange, rather than the standard multi-million-dollar, highly engineered solution that that's usually required. And one of the things that we're doing here is demonstrating what it can look like for a whole state to organize itself productively around rail development. Class 1 railroads are used to having to field a whole slate of baked projects and half-baked projects because of the challenge that shippers and users and land developers and economic development entities have to really conceive of their projects in a way that they can land effectively in a Class 1 railroad. It makes it a really big challenge for these companies to field, you know, a whole country worth of folks coming at them. So getting the state oriented around intelligent rail development is really the answer to how we're going to all work together to lay down new infrastructure and new services. And you know, I want to, I'll stop there, Andrew, but if you want to come back to some discussion of the supply chain orientation that's baked into the Nevada plan, that'd be great.
Yeah, well, I think that's the kind of the logical extension here, and maybe kind of that's something that Kris could maybe kind of talk to, the fact that would you describe this as kind of opening really the potential, instead of just looking at specific sites, but specific industries, even specific companies that kind of announce, yes, we're up for the highest bidder to get us to locate in your state. That's kind of been a traditional model, which has really not helped strategic logistical planning. Is that something kind of that's really you've taken from this study?
You know, absolutely. I think I alluded to that earlier in my earlier remarks, but that's exactly, I think, a valid point. And that, you know, there's growth potential throughout the state with existing industry that we aren't able to capitalize on because we don't have the rail infrastructure to support that growth. And so there's I think a couple areas we need to be mindful of. We want to be mindful of making sure that we are and remain attractive to companies that are looking to come into the state to invest and grow here and potentially relocate to Nevada. But we also need to make sure that with respect to the companies, our existing companies, as Michael had indicated in their research, that we are reaching out to them. There's a retention piece to this, in other words, where we've got to make sure that we work with private industry to develop rail to serve their needs. You know, Sheldon had mentioned the industrial hemp is a good example. That's a relatively new industry for Nevada. It's new in the United States, but there's a tremendous potential for industrial hemp in Nevada, especially in the eastern quarter of the state. But frankly, the rail in that quadrant of the state will not support the growth of that industry, period. So they have a desire, there's a large investment there by one particular company. There's a real desire for them over time as they grow to go into different verticals and actual production of hemp-based products. Rail will be essential for them to realize that objective. So when we look at that as a micro example, once we enhance the rail infrastructure in that region, there's also benefits to the mining industry. There's benefits to our hay growers in the state and other industries. So the one great thing from an economic development perspective, just to wrap this comment up, about rail is that it services different sectors of our economy. So once we have the infrastructure in place, we then can grow more strategically across different sectors and industries.
Okay, thank you, Kris. I'll take a specific question that we got asked here. It was from Rick Rybeck. And I know Rick is a specialist in land value capture, particularly, and a kind of relation to this. But specifically, it's about the Tesla plant, which Michael referred to. So kind of if I can summarize Rick's point, it was kind of the rationale for why they built where they built. Was it just an economic decision because the land was so much cheaper? But then kind of has an extension to that saying, you know, land value is a key element in all of this. A rail line should presumably add value to land, which is either owned by the state or owned by a private developer. So I just wondered, maybe Kris or Sheldon, if you have a view on that, and maybe can also give us any more on the Tesla sighting.
Yeah, so there's a number of factors why a company chooses to a particular location. With respect to Tesla, I mean, the proximity to their facility in Fremont, California was extremely important. And so they are within within half a day's drive from one facility to the other. And certainly by air, less than 40 minutes. That mattered because they have engineers that are going from that plant to Fremont and back and forth daily. And they needed that proximity and ease of access. So that was one factor of many. The other point I think to make is that the industrial complex that they're in is in a county called Story County, and back in 2001, before that industrial complex was developed, the private developer worked with the county officials and locked in all the zoning requirements and the fees associated with development there, with the idea that they would be able to move very, very quickly from first interaction with a company to actually getting dirt moving on the site. So there's a pretty famous story now about, I think Elon Musk actually mentioned this, but they were able to get their building permit for one of the largest facilities at that time in the world in less than an hour. But a lot of that didn't happen by accident. It was because of the way that they approached development in that park. So there's a lot of factors that go into, and as I'm sure everybody's aware of that, and on this, they're pretty savvy folks on our Zoom call. But the proximity really was extremely important. And as to the rail piece of that, I'm certainly Tesla could benefit by having rail connected to their facility there. I think the question becomes how they work with both the broader park and the state to get that done. So we're happy to have those conversations as time goes on.
Okay.
Andrew, let me just add to Kris's comments. There's significant land development going on throughout Nevada, and particularly in the western part of the state. We interacted with just about all of the major land developers, and I was curious to find out if there's anything about their business model or their approach that would have them not be interested in rail. Was there something about their development strategy? And in fact, not one had a reason that they wouldn't want to see rail brought to their existing developments, their future developments. There's just a lot of other factors, commercial factors that are going on in the marketplace that has rail not be top of mind or not be convenient, particularly in the conception and development phase. Again, if an industry, it's not easy to field projects and project sponsors at all their stages of conception. And rail is something that from the beginning you want to start relating with a Class 1 railroad about before you've even gotten your funding lined up. And so, again, with ranking, they're continually having to allot their focus to some project sponsors and leave out many others. And so that's what we heard over and over again, is that, if we can make rail service and all the steps of what it takes to develop rail service, if we can make that easier, they're absolutely interested in having their projects be rail served.
Okay, yeah, good point, Michael. And a follow up from Rick actually, in terms of talked about land value, about is there a way to incentivize development alongside rail lines? Not dissuading development there because it's kind of maybe overpricing it and pushing people away from where there actually is a sustainable logistics option.
Yes, we related extensively with the Nevada State Land Use Planning Advisory Council, which has representatives from each county, from the planning departments. And that's exactly one of the things we suggested, is that the state move toward a set of supports and incentives for preserving land along rail lines for rail served development. And it's akin to preserving recreational space around a scenic lake for recreational purposes and not putting industry there. We just haven't shifted yet in the United States to thoughtful freight transportation land use planning. We have on the transit side, and even supported the funding of transit projects by accommodating developers and rail project sponsors to utilize increased tax base of properties that get developed around a transit stop. The land in Nevada can be much greater value when we bring the kind of supply chain logistics efficiencies through better rail and trucking interface, that all the land, when it comes to freight oriented or logistics oriented to land, much like the value of retail space being dependent on the volume of potential customers that are walking or driving by a store, when it comes to freight land, the degree to which you improve its logistics connections, in this case, east and west, the land in Nevada can be not only increased in value, but developed as part of an ecologically sound industrial development and transportation system. So Tesla's lack of use of rail is really, and we've met with them, half a dozen times and found out all the details about it. And it's it's just a story of missed opportunities to collaborate between railroads and shippers. And all that can be addressed. This plan is more than a plan, because a plan is typically something that's put into a document and put on a shelf. This is a plan for results and a plan for action. And the things that we're talking about and the dynamics are ripe for being addressed, because there's so much to gain. Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
Andrew, can I come in here? Just picking up that point that Michael was making, and there's been some questions in the chat as well about the balance of the supply side, if we can call it that, of getting the strategic plan right and getting the facilities right, and the demand side. We have a phrase in the UK called "you can lead a horse to the water, but you can't make it drink." And there's something there about customers wanting to use rail. Now, that will generally come for two reasons. One, because it's economically good, they're going to save some cost on it, or increasingly, they're going to have a better solution in the round, and that could well be more environmental orientation going forward. Now, on the latter point, some of the things that are starting to emerge from Bloomberg and other people about corporate rating systems, which reflect a company's environmental performance, I think is probably going to be helpful. There's the ratings based on the disclosures, which are going to be, I think, very helpful for rail-based distribution supply chain developments all across the world. I think that gives us who care about increasing the amount of rail a really good lever to go to companies like Tesla and others and say, we all, I guess, have a moral duty to do something about this, but pretty soon, if the Bloomberg initiative takes off, it's going to go to your bottom line. It's going to affect your cost of capital. Now, at that point, even the most cynical company will start to get interested. So I think the climate, in the broad sense of that word, not the specific sense, is becoming quite favorable. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us to go out to companies to tell them what's available, what rail can do for them, and just make ourselves more accessible. Because, we have a whole generation of logisticians and distribution directors who've only ever grown up with rubber tires. And we need to go out there and explain to them how steel wheel on steel rail can be part of the answer for them. Not the whole answer by any means, but part of the answer. So there's a communication piece here as well as a physical and a planning piece.
Yes, very good point there, Julian. I think just one thing I'd add on to that, it's not always just about economics. A lot of it is supply chain design, from what I've heard. I mean, the West Coast ports get very congested. Receiving by rail is sometimes more attractive, well, often more attractive than done by road. But also it gives flexibility. You know, there's a movement in North America towards more East Coast ports, whether that's through the expansion of the Panama Canal or the fact that supply chains around the world are changing. We're receiving more from the easterly direction. So I think there is many factors to play. And, you know, kind of if I can maybe just summarize a little bit, because we need to start to close up now. I believe it's really opened or illuminated, you know, a different way of thinking around this. I would like to thank all of the panelists for giving up your time today. Also, everybody that's joined, everybody that's asked questions. I apologize if we've not got to all of the points that have been raised. We will capture all of the things that you've sent through. And we will be sharing a link to everyone, so you can kind of watch this again if you really wanted to, or share it with any colleagues that couldn't make today's session. The last thing I'll just do is just put up something on the screen, and just to kind of show everyone again who you've been listening to today. And some links there at the bottom if anybody has any interest in joining CILT or would like to learn more about us. I would be delighted to kind of receive any requests or suggestions for future events, future webinars, or any future speaking places. But I think we kind of are coming up to our 90 minutes slot now. So I'll just kind of finalize by saying thank you all again to everyone that's contributed to today. I hope you found this a very interesting and useful presentation, and we look forward to seeing you on a future CILT event. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.